Hello, people of the internet, and welcome to part 2 of Patrick and I's look through the history of Heisei Godzilla, where we take a look at every single movie between 1989 and all the way to 2019. And as I mentioned before, I am here once again with the one and only Patrick Galvan, who you may know from both Toho Kingdom as well as Sci-Fi Wire.
Oh, thanks for having me on again, Andres.
Absolutely, man. You're the only person I can count on to get the cold hard facts when it comes to Godzilla, Toho, and everything in between. Now, it's
good to know that all this random info I got round around my head comes into use every now and then.
So, in the last part, we took a look at what most Americans would consider the true Heisei period of Godzilla, that being from all the Godzilla films of the 80s and 90s. And so we took a look at that as what Japan refers to as the Versus series, from Biollante all the way to Destroya, and we also gave an honorable mention to Godzilla 1984, or The Return of Godzilla, as a way to see how the origins of Heisei Godzilla would get started continuity-wise, and how things transitioned between films from 84 all the way to 95. And as you mentioned, or as we talked about in the last episode, by the time they reached Godzilla vs. Destroya, they were getting ready to wrap things up, to finish things while things were still good. And, not only that, but also to prepare Hollywood to get ready for the upcoming Godzilla 98 film, which was, Hollywood's first true proper attempt at making a Godzilla film, with other failed attempts such as Godzilla 3D in the 80s and Godzilla 94 in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that is a good place to start in terms of talking about what Americans tend to call the Millennium series of Godzilla films. Although, I guess technically people don't really count Godzilla 98 as a Millennium film at all, but given that it is a movie that bears the name Godzilla, and it is the movie that is pretty much responsible for the existence of the Millennium films, I feel like we do have to talk about that.
Oh yeah, I think so too. Also because in a way the 98 film is related to both the end of the Versus series and the beginning of what we're talking about here. So it's a transitional film that, in a sense, is it basically it warrants a mention of some kind, at least when you're talking about the overall history of the Heisei series.
Right. Now, quality-wise, I feel pretty much like we wouldn't really have anything new to say here.
No.
The movie sucks. Characters are generic. Action is so decent. CGI hasn't aged well. Everything else is pretty decent for the most part. It's kind of like it's just like a perfect example of like B-movie trash.
You know what it is? It's a typical Roland Emmerich film.
True. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's like, if you're looking for more Independence Day without the charisma of Jeff Goldblum and Will Smith, that's exactly, you've got exactly what you want.
Yeah, it's basically every Emmerich film that wasn't the first Independence Day.
Right. Although I do have to wonder why exactly they had to go with. I mean, I get the feeling that they wanted to go with they want to repeat the same character trope that you see with Jeff Goldblum's character, as like the nerdy, dweeby, awkward dude who gets the chance to shine as the true hero. I can only wonder if that was some sort of self-insert protagonist writing there.
Well, I think actually it's funny. Emmerich has kind of done away with that kind of character since he stopped working with Dean Devlin. So I've always speculated that, and also Dean Devlin's kind of a nerdy, awkward guy with glasses. So
right,
and you also saw the James Spader character in Stargate, and Jeff Goldblum in Independence Day, Matthew Broderick in the 98 film, and again, once they stopped working together, Emmerich kind of stopped showing the nerdy, dweeby guy with glasses anymore. So I think that was kind of Dean Devlin's personal touch, I wonder.
Yeah. It makes you wonder, huh? And for whatever, I guess they got what was it? Matthew Broderick, because it was the 90s. He was hot off of The Lion King a couple years back, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and War Games. I don't really think there were any other major movies that he was in outside of Inspector Gadget after Godzilla 98. But yeah, he was definitely at the height of his popularity, I would say. And for whatever reason, they had access to a good portion of the Simpsons voice cast in there. It's just like it feels really random when you take a good look at it.
Yeah.
It's like
if you know the faces to look for, it's gonna be like every 5 minutes it's gonna be like, hey, I know that person. Hey, I know that person too.
Yeah. It's like a really interesting like microcosm of like American culture at that point in time.
It is.
And yeah, we were talking about how the development of this first true Hollywood Godzilla film would impact the progression of the Heisei series, in which, they originally wanted to end it in 93. Then it's like, no, we're still working on it. Okay, let's continue it a couple more years. And then Toho was like, fuck it, let's just end it here and now. And from what I understand, I remember there was like this booklet in the DVD for Godzilla 2000, I think. And in the booklet, it talked about Toho taking a break, originally wanting to take a break between 1995 and 2004. And when Hollywood Godzilla came out, they decided to cancel their 10-year retirement plan and bring back Godzilla in the form of Godzilla 2000. Is that true, Patrick? Were they actually planning on another full 10-year retirement plan, similar to what they did between 75 and 84?
Well, here's the thing. It kind of ties back into like what I mentioned in the last video about why the Heisei series ended, the Versus series.
Right.
There is what Toho said in their PR, and then there's what you can speculate from looking at the actual like financial statistics.
Okay.
It is true that actually I should also say, first of all, like as I mentioned in the last video, Toho was never contractually obliged to end the Versus series to make room for the TriStar film.
Okay.
It was their own voluntary decision.
Okay, so this is not like what it's like right currently with Legendary and Toho, where it's like they can't make any more live-action films, with Shin Godzilla being the one exception.
Right.
Okay.
When here's the funny thing about Godzilla 1998 is that when that film was on its way to release, Toho threw their full support behind that film.
Right.
They gave it the widest distribution in Japan of any Godzilla film ever made at that point.
Uh-huh.
They even showed it in theaters that were not even owned by their own company.
Okay.
They were really excited by the idea of this big, Western Hollywood blockbuster with a huge budget that had their brand name on it.
Right. I'm sure they're very excited about that, going for that international brand recognition.
Exactly. And when the film came out and the fan backlash started to rise, actually Toho in the press actually defended the film against the fans. There was a publicist named Masahiko Suzuki who went out of his way to say, hey, we made this film for mainstream audiences as well as you Godzilla fans, and even for you Godzilla fans, it's still an enjoyable film.
In other words, shut up and like it.
Exactly. Now, however, once Godzilla 98 was done with its theatrical run, and Toho had acquired all the vast majority of the coffers they were going to get from it, and also by distributing it in Japan, they got a lot of the domestic intake as far as box office receipts in Japan go.
Okay.
So, but once they were done with that, that's when they started doing the whole about face thing of, maybe we should make our own film, and kind of like tacitly hint that it's kind of like a response to this film here.
Uh-huh. And of course, it reminded me of the sort of like famous story within the fandom where Kenpachiro Satsuma was like walked out of the movie theater and he was like, "This is not Godzilla."
Yeah, actually, that's the really funny thing is that Satsuma actually said that when the film was brand new. But here's the thing, and Nakajima was also again kind of a tangent, but I think it's worth talking about to give some insight.
Sure.
Both Nakajima and Satsuma were openly critical of the film from the very start when it first opened. But
it's a good thing they're technically not like full-time Toho employees, because that's not the Japanese way.
And that is exactly the reason why they were able to say that, because Nakajima had not been on Toho's payroll by that point for 26 years. And
like, I'm a loose cannon. I can do whatever I want.
Yes, and Satsuma had never been a Toho employee. He was always freelance from the very beginning. So both of those guys were totally free to say whatever they wanted. Now, everybody at the studio who still was employed by Toho, like, say, Koichi Kawakita and such, they just went dead silent while the film was still in theaters.
Right. That's something I have heard a lot. It's like, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say it at all, at least publicly.
Yeah, and it's also just bad PR to badmouth someone that has your company's brand name attached to it while it's the process of making money. Usually,
like, actors and filmmakers don't even talk smack about their own movies until, like, 10 years after the fact.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also true of Toho in regards to 98. Nowadays, they'll admit that they'll call it a quote-unquote disaster, whereas back then they were championing it and supporting it and calling it enjoyable for everybody, et cetera, and so forth. But as I was saying, once the film was done with its big run in theaters and it had acquired the vast majority of the profits it was going to make, that's when Toho decided to sort of tacitly backhand it a little bit in the press. That's when Tomiyama came forth and said that their plan was only to have Godzilla on hiatus until 2005, actually, 10-year hiatus from 95 to 2005.
Right.
And that's when they also created the suggestion that Godzilla 2000 was created as a response to the 98 film. That's also where you had staff members of Godzilla 2000 openly criticizing the Hollywood film, saying that it was too synthetic, that it was not representational of what Godzilla was, and that they wanted to make Godzilla 2000 as a response to the film. Which, again, here's the other very funny thing is that, contrary to what certain people want to believe, Toho knew exactly what kind of film they were getting when they signed on the deal with Godzilla 98. Emmerich had flown to Japan to present his vision of what he wanted to do, and Toho backed it. They would have been in full power to reject the project.
Right. They could have prevented this from happening if because they did have the chance.
Yep, it's their trademark, and they could have said no. Now, as to why they wanted to go along with it, well, again, this is by this point because Emmerich made his pitch in 97, I think, 96 or 97. So this is many years after the deal was signed between the two studios, and Toho and Sony had hoped that there would have been a film made by this point. And it's very fair to speculate Toho just wanted to have a film come out sooner or later. And the fact that Emmerich had just made Independence Day, which itself was a huge, gigantic smash sensation, including in Japan, that probably just would have further encouraged them to go along with the matter. But in any event, if they felt offended or whatever by the project, they could have said no, and Sony/TriStar would have had no choice but to keep looking for a creative team.
So in a way, they were willing to abandon or swallow their integrity for the sake of profit. That's what it certainly appears to be. And it wasn't until after that they did the whole about phase of, it was too synthetic, it wasn't Godzilla, etc., and so forth. We'll show Hollywood.
Which sounds very, very similar to what's happened in recent years, doesn't it?
Most definitely. Also, I could only imagine, when they saw Godzilla, from what I understand, there was a meeting where Roland Emmerich went over and Dean Devlin went over to the Toho executives and showed off a maquette model of Godzilla 98. And at that point, everyone was in shock or silence. And I think one of them mentioned it was so radically different that it was impossible for us to make any sort of changes because they would have had if we were to suggest any changes, they would have had to redo the whole thing. And
although at the same time, they gave their approval to the project the very next morning.
Yeah. Maybe they must have thought, you know what? Maybe this is what Americans enjoy. Maybe this can work. Yeah, maybe this is what those silly Americans are into. I mean, after all, Jurassic Park was a thing. Yeah, but Godzilla '98 was, it was technically a success, but it was pretty much a failure critically. It didn't make as much money as before. In fact, you shared me a lot of this like helpful information when I was making my review for Godzilla '98. With at this point, I'm just repeating everything you told me. How it's like the merchandising sales were tanked. Sony asked for more money from the movie theaters, a larger cut of the box office profits from movie theaters, in the hopes that it would be bigger than usual. But no, instead, the theaters lost more money after as a result of Godzilla '98. Sony got away with it. Everyone else was screwed over. The fans,
pretty much, yes.
The what was it? The fans, the theaters, the trend masters, the merchandising people. Yeah, everyone lost money out of this, with Sony being the only one really coming out of this alive. And it's very funny how Sony's partnership with Toho continues to this very day, with them being like the sole distributors for the Versus series, as well as the Versus and Millennium series. I do wonder how that came about, or why that continues to this very day.
Well, I'm guessing it's just because they made because Toho did make a lot of money off of the film. TriStar paid their licensing fee. They got to distribute it in Japan, and in Japan it sold about 4 million tickets, which was about on par with like Destroya and Mothra 92. So it wasn't like it wasn't absolutely like through the roof, but it was very profitable, and they did make a lot of money off of it.
I see.
So I'm sure they kind of went along with it. I don't know for sure. If somebody does know, let us know in the comments. But I'm sure it was just riding off the coattails of that, the fact that they had a agreement, they had a good partnership with Sony in the beginning, and just kind of kept going along with it. That's my speculation.
I see. And I would say while the end result wasn't what fans wanted at the time, I feel like everything around the film, in terms of the bigger picture of the franchise, did a lot of good, I would say. I mean, the most direct tie-in was the animated series, which I would argue to this day is still the best animated incarnation of Godzilla. We have again, the wide support, the support of Sony releasing all the '90s and later the Millennium films on DVD and VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray. Godzilla was probably kind of how would you say, more widely available, or more widely seen, or had a much wider span in terms of visibility within American pop culture during the late 90s and during the late 90s. And it's sort of like that idea where the fans were left wanting more, and so a lot of people came in to give them just that in the years following Godzilla '98. So I feel like I don't really think it damaged the reputation or it damaged the branding of Godzilla, but rather it sort of enforced it by reminding, it gave the fans a chance to let Toho know what they want out of Godzilla, and Toho gave them just that, I think. It reminded us what a real Godzilla should look like, and thanks to the fan support and backlash, we got what we wanted. A side note, I thought it would have been interesting had they revealed the design of Godzilla much earlier in production. And I think to myself, imagine if the internet had existed. I know the internet did technically exist, but imagine if the internet was like it was today, and we would have had a Sonic the Hedgehog movie situation where it's we're going to delay the movie so we can redesign Godzilla and give him the design that the fans truly deserve. # gotta fix it fast. # no visual effects artists were harmed during the making of this film.
Yeah, if that film was made today in this day and age of social media in particular, yeah, there would have been a lot more backlash from the beginning as opposed to later on.
And I would say that while Godzilla, I would agree with what Dylan has said in the past, where while Godzilla 98 is not a very good representation of Godzilla, it definitely works as its own creature, and I'm glad to have seen it still get some, slowly get some love and support over the years as under the moniker of Zilla.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the monster on its own terms is fine. It's just the movie it's in is not, especially, exciting.
Right. And, maybe the design could have worked had the movie been better. I'm sorry. Oh. What's that?
I'm sorry. What was that?
I said that maybe the design could have worked had the movie been better.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, moving on to Godzilla 2000, or as it's known in Japan, Godzilla 2000 Millennium, the start of what fans in America would call the Millennium series, or what people in Japan called the X series, due to the abundance of X's in the titles of these movies. So I always kind of saw this movie as sort of like the definitive generic status quo reboot of Godzilla. And it's like, while generic is usually seen as like a negative thing, I kind of see this as a positive thing because it provides a very basic setup for a Godzilla status quo that you can practically do anything with. So it feels like a really good jumping on point for a lot of people, be it fans or non-fans, or not fans and non-fans alike. And at the same time, it also kind of comes across as sort of like a modern age throwback to the Showa era, where, you got like an alien invasion plot, but at the same time, you're kind of enhancing it with the dawn of the new millennium, the information superhighway, the whole, it kind of plays into the fears of Y2K, of our over-reliance on technology. Although I argue it doesn't go all the way with that theme, but I find it to be a rather interesting installment in the franchise for giving us like a blend of old and new at the same time.
Yeah, and it's Godzilla 2000 was actually the first Godzilla film that I ever saw, frankly.
Oh, wow, okay.
If you don't want to count the 98 film.
Uh-huh.
I saw that film in the theater under the impression that I was going to see a sequel to the TriStar picture.
Right. I mean, it has 2 in the title, after all.
Yeah. Yeah. And needless to say, I liked this movie more than the one that I'd seen previous, and then that's just what led me to becoming a big fan of this franchise. And yeah, it's not a film that is especially serious. Mm-hmm. And it's a very old-fashioned kind of picture, which I think it kind of bronzes its appeal. But at the same time, it does a few things new with some of its old-fashioned ideas, like the take on the alien invasion story is different from what we've seen in past Godzilla pictures.
Yeah. I mean, it's not for once we don't really get an alien with a human form. It's just this sort of like omnipotent, like unrecognizable being that's very hard to describe. You don't even know if it's like a collection. I believe in the Japanese version, when you see it giving its, I'm not sure if this is in the American version, I just noticed this the first time watching the Japanese version, where it displays like messages in a lot of TV and computer screen monitors. And I think it's sort of, I could be wrong, but it's referred to as multiple entities within the ship, but I guess in the American version, it is described as a singular entity. The manga itself does it a little different. It really goes into the more anime direction, where it's like a series, like an entire species of people living in that ship, with one particular individual serving as like the mouthpiece for the Millenniums, as they are called in the manga and Japanese version. But yeah, it's this very mysterious creature, very intriguing, and it has like understandable motivations with it wanting to sort of repair its body using Godzilla's DNA, and it's also a bit tragic, where its final form ends up becoming this horrific mutated hunchback abomination, and But at the same time, it also has this very ominous vibe to it, where it's willing to sacrifice anything in order to take over, in order to reclaim its physical form. And judging by that one scene, it feels like it's learning from humanity, learning how it can counterattack learning about humanity's history of war and how it can learn from that in order to take over this world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's quite a rather subtle. It's like subtly like built up to be this like multi-layered foe, both in terms of its like as the Millennium and its final form Orga.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I gotta really give them props on putting a new spin on the alien invasion story. And yeah, I do like the idea of involving a lot of technology in it. It still feels like a movie that could be made to this day, so it doesn't really feel all that dated with the idea of using the internet in a Godzilla movie.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. And there anything else? I did mention it's a blending of old and new, and I feel like that also applies to the special effects as well. You know, you got your classic models and suits, but you got a lot of a rather ambitious amount of digital effects work here, and not a majority of them don't really work here. Like, you know, CGI Godzilla or like these very ambitious composite shots where it's like Godzilla's walking in a live action background, but like the two elements don't really line up with one another. Again, still very ambitious, and I gotta give them props on that. And what else could I mention? To reflect the whole idea of like a little bit of old and new, even the team behind this film features some returning faces and some new people to the scene. We had like Takao Okawara, who previously worked on Godzilla vs. Mothra, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, and Godzilla vs. Destroya. We also got Kenji Suzuki, who was a special effects director who's been around since the beginning of the 80s Toho films, but only really became a special effects director after Kawakita retired, and he took over with Rebirth of Mothra 3. And I gotta say, like, his work is already a huge improvement over Kawakita's work.
Yep. Actually, it was not only an improvement in terms of execution, but also an improvement in terms of like collaboration between the special effects crew and the live action crew. Something that we did not mention in the last video that we probably should have was the very strained and unfriendly relationship between Koichi Kawakita and his live action directors.
Oh, okay.
Takao Okawara, who had worked with Kawakita on three films, actually 4 if you want to count Yamato Takaru.
Okay.
He described Kawakita as a very standoffish, cut off, don't say a thing about my work kind of guy. And he admitted that they spent very little time in discussion on any of their films. They'd go over storyboards and just kind of like go their separate ways, and there wasn't a lot of communication or cooperation between the two crews. However, when Okawara worked with Suzuki on Godzilla 2000, he had nothing but good things to say about him. He pointed out that Suzuki always was a team player from the very start. That he allowed Okawara to introduce his own ideas and how the special effects scenes would be done. That Suzuki would take an active role in the process of creating the story. And unlike the last couple of films, there was very smooth and easygoing communication between both the special effects crews and the live action crews in Godzilla 2000. There wasn't any of these standoffish animosity that you had on the earlier Heisei films. And of all the films that all the Godzilla films that Okawara worked on, this one had the strongest teamwork between the live action crew and the special effects crew, and I think that also kind of shows in this film because there's so many wonderful moments of the human crew of the human characters, the live action elements actually interacting with the special effects. You know, like most famously, Katagiri's famous death sequence for one.
Oh yeah. where it's almost like Katagiri refuses to bow down to Godzilla even in the face of his own demise. Like, great send-off there.
Mm-hmm. Even though this film, even though the third act of Godzilla 2000 kind of rehashes the previous Heisei thing of the human characters just watching the monsters fight,
right?
This one feels a little more involved because they react to what's happening more often, and at sometimes the battle sequences actually affect them. Like there's a point where Godzilla hits the UFO with his ray, and a big chunk of debris comes barreling towards the human characters on top of that building.
Yes, I remember.
It just feels more involved and quote unquote in the moment than as compared to like say the last couple of films in the series where you had that same kind of storytelling technique.
I see. So there's like a higher level of cooperation and synergy between all parties involved in this production.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I really do think that this is Okawara's best directing effort as far as the Godzilla films go. I do think his best movie overall is Abduction, his previous film, which was a crime thriller. Mm-hmm. But of all his Godzilla pictures, I think this one just works the best. It's got the most interesting story as far as I'm concerned. For once, he actually has an all-out decent cast to work with. You got Murata, you got Sano, you got Nishida, Hiroshi Abe, et cetera, and so forth. These are much, much better actors than a lot of the earlier Heisei casts had, and that really shows in the quality of the performances in this film. And it's just visually a lot more interesting to look at than a lot of the previous Heisei films. It's not as simplistic in the way that it's shot.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of like long takes, great use of wide shots, really unique choices of camera angles. And by the way, it was photographed by the same man who did the cinematography for Godzilla vs. Biollante, which probably also plays a big factor. This is the key thing, is that Okawara had really good collaborators on this film. He had a really good script, good cameraman, good special effects director to work with, a good cast for a change, and it all came together and it worked out quite well. And this as a result, this film has a lot, in my view, has a lot fewer problems than his previous three Godzilla pictures did.
Oh yeah, most definitely. And I do got to give credit to the people involved in the American cut or the English cut of Godzilla 2000, where I know a lot of people have combed through both versions and have found multiple cuts and edits to both versions, or made for the American version. For me, it's like the ones that I find the most obvious are perhaps like everything involving the music, and the music and the pacing. I feel like the Japanese version took things a little too slow. Some events, such as the final battle, felt a bit too quiet and awkwardly handled. So I do got to give props for making the English American version a bit more, I guess I could say livelier, perhaps, in very subtle ways. And it's like, this is nothing like what the other company did to Godzilla 1984 when it became Godzilla 1985. Yeah, I still feel like it's very respectable, and I do thought it was a very interesting decision to cast have all the English voice actors be of Japanese descent. I mean,
yeah, I think Mike Schlesinger said he didn't want the actors to sound like they were from Wisconsin.
Okay, I see. Although it'd be funny if they got a Japanese American voiceover artist who is from Wisconsin.
Let's see. I lived in Wisconsin for about a year, and there was actually a really large community of Hmong people there.
Oh,
so
okay.
Maybe they should have hired some Hmong people and found out they were from Wisconsin.
And they're like, God damn it! I imagine you get like someone who is from like I don't know, Alabama. It's like, listen here, did you see that giant flying rock go by? It was unbelievable. I reckon.
Actually, funny enough, I was watching the Japanese version of King Kong vs. Godzilla earlier today, and like this in the American submarine, the like a second in command or whatever sounds exactly like that.
Of course, he had a Western accent.
Yeah, he sounded like he was from like a movie Texas Ranger kind of guy.
I gotta say, Pilgrim, that is one giant lizard. He truly is the son of God. Godzilla. Oh boy. So, and last thing I wanted to mention was, I gotta say, this is one hell of a Godzilla redesign here. And I feel like this is definitely the design that would sort of embody this, what most Godzillas would look like going forward, where Godzilla 2 versus Megaguirus, it's essentially like a more saturated version of the 99 suit. Godzilla Tokyo against Mechagodzilla and Tokyo SOS, both of them feature like a slight redesign of that suit, but it feels like this one had like a tremendous impact on how Godzilla would be portrayed in a lot of media moving forward. This was the version that like the Atari video games were based off of. This one influenced the Kiryu, the duology design that would later influence the look of Godzilla for a good portion of the IDW comics. So I gotta give a tremendous amount of applause for the people who designed this team, for the team that designed this version of Godzilla, this sort of like crazy version of Godzilla. I think this may have had Shinji Nishikawa's involvement. I know Shinji Nishikawa, he was an artist who did a lot of the concept artwork behind the Versus series, and he would continue to play a role as a concept artist through most of this, and I think he also had a hand in designing this one as well. Let's find out.
Okay. I don't know. I don't remember the top of my head, but let's find out. Take like a couple seconds to figure out.
All right. It's like, what's this? Something that Patrick does not know of off the top of his head?
Yep, I'm just a well-read fan. I don't know everything.
This is madness.
I know a lot, but I don't know everything.
But yeah, looking at his filmography, at least on the Godzilla wiki, Shinji Nishikawa has worked from Biollante all the way to Godzilla Final Wars, and would go on to even work on a lot of the modern Ultraman shows, from Ultraman Ginga in 2013 all the way to Ultraman Orb in 2016. So yeah, this dude has definitely been very committed to the Japanese giant monster subgenre of entertainment. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in fact, I actually bought his book that contains a huge collection of his concept art, and it's very interesting looking at all the concepts that would eventually be brought to life by Koichi Kawakita and the special effects directors of the Millennium series.
Let's see. I'm still trying to comb through and see if I can find this. If he designed that one suit or sure. This. So go ahead. Keep blathering.
Sure. Okay. I guess to bring up this one, personal history with Godzilla 2000. I did see this in the theaters, and initially I thought this was a sequel, this being like the baby that survived at the end of Godzilla 98, but obviously that wasn't the case, and I could easily tell watching the movie that this was definitely something that was unlike whatever the hell I saw in Godzilla 98. At this point, I had... unlike you, I had seen several Godzilla movies before 98 and 2000. For me, I grew up watching a lot of the Showa Godzilla films on VHS, and some of the 90s Godzilla films on television, mainly King Ghidorah and Mothra, and perhaps I also saw Biollante on the HBO VHS at my local Blockbuster. Let's see. But, so watching Godzilla 2000, it's felt very vindicated, where it's like, yes, this is exactly what I wanted out of the Hollywood movie. This is what I want to see. And it was truly a miraculous experience getting the chance to see that movie on the big screen. And it would pretty much be the last Godzilla movie I would see on the big screen, the last Japanese Godzilla movie I would see on the big screen, up until 2016's Shin Godzilla, which was another very memorable moment for me. And I would have been very interested in seeing where they could have gone with this continuity, but for whatever reason, Toho made this very bizarre decision to turn the X series / Millennium series into an anthology series, where each movie essentially took place in its own continuity. supposedly using the original Godzilla, 1954 Godzilla, as a backdrop, although in some cases it's left more vague than others. And yeah, to this day, I still don't know what exactly was the reason behind this. The only explanation I've ever found was an article on Toho Kingdom that claimed that that Toho wanted to make three movies set in different continuities, and whichever one was the most successful, they turned that into a series. But I have not seen any other source outside of Toho Kingdom that has done that. And I remember I asked you a couple of years back if you had any insight on this, and I guess I'm not sure if you found anything since then, but this always remained like a big mystery for us.
Mm-hmm. I talked to the author who wrote that article back many years ago, and when he remembers, his source for that was from the old defunct website Monster Zero.
Mm-hmm.
But that's based off an old memory, so there could be some truth to that. There could not be. So
possibly, maybe it's after reading that article, I thought from what I understand, Godzilla's popularity was sort of on a decline at this point, as each subsequent movie would receive less and less box office resulting in the final failure of Final Wars. Or the big failure that was Final Wars. And so it's possible that this was Toho's attempt at trying to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. So it's Godzilla Millennium 2000 didn't work, let's do Megaguirus. Megaguirus didn't work, let's do GMK. Or maybe by the time they got to GMK, they're like, fuck it, let's just do whatever and see what happens.
From what I understand, I've heard, secondhand, that supposedly Shoko Tomiyama told a interviewer for G-Fan at one point that his idea was to make three unrelated films and see with three different creative teams and see which one just made the biggest impression. But again, that's secondhand. I don't know for sure if that was his line of thinking.
Okay.
Oh, actually, we probably should mention before we jump ahead, we should probably talk about the Japanese reception to Godzilla 2000.
Oh, okay, sure, yeah.
Since you kind of mentioned how the box office for the Millennium series was not so warm overall.
Right, because I mentioned before, but during the Versus series, this was the most popular Godzilla was ever going to be. Even up to it, which would feature a decline right afterwards that continues to this very day.
Mm-hmm. Well, we should say that Godzilla 2000, it's very strange. Here in the United States, amongst American fans, Godzilla 2000 is considered kind of a modern classic, as you and I kind of alluded to. In Japan, it was not well received at all.
Mm-hmm.
It was critically torn to pieces. Godzilla fans were not happy with it. Toho itself was not happy with it. The creators of the film were not happy with it either. The final results. Hiroshi Kashiwabara, who co-wrote the screenplay, he thought it was absolutely terrible.
Wow.
He did not like it whatsoever. And actually, Masaki Tezuka, who would direct Godzilla vs. Megaguirus next, he hated Godzilla 2000.
That is really ironic, considering his results.
I know, but the funny thing is that Tezuka said he liked the '98 film as its own thing, and he could not stand Godzilla 2000.
And
as for box office, Godzilla 2000 had a really strong opening weekend. Because it came after the aftermath of the '98 film. There was a good ad campaign put behind the film. There was a lot of buzz going into it. However, once the film came out and word of mouth got out, the numbers dropped very quickly, and it ended up doing just okay at the Japanese box office. It wasn't a big flop, but it wasn't particularly successful either.
I
think it sold about 2 million tickets, which was far below the average for the Heisei series. So already we're seeing a big drop in terms of attendance.
Right. Do you think it's possible that people were so critical of it because people were now focusing on Hollywood's quickly increasing use of CG, like computer enhanced special effects, and we're now judging Japanese movies by the standards of Hollywood.
Perhaps, and also by this time, it's been like 4 years since we had a Japanese Godzilla film. And in between that, you had the TriStar picture. So we have a whole generation. We have like 4 years worth of moviegoers, including kids, who didn't have a Godzilla to grow up with.
That is true. Yeah.
And then this film comes out, and as I said, it was not well received by really anybody in Japan. It was not right. It was not popular by any stretch of the imagination. Probably. So that did not help either.
It's I can imagine like the teenagers and young adults who grew up with the Heisei the Versus series have grown up at this point. Maybe they've already moved on from Godzilla, and now you got these younger kids who are checking out Godzilla, and maybe for them it's just not their thing. Maybe it's just like that generational gap is starting to affect them. Let's see. So. Yeah, there's still some left. It's still left ambiguous as to what exactly was the purpose of going with another reboot. But now hearing that Godzilla 2000 was essentially hated by everyone in Japan, including the people involved in working on the movie, it's starting to become a bit clearer now why they quickly went ahead with making another reboot right afterwards with Godzilla vs. Megaguirus, or as it's known in Japan, Godzilla X Megaguirus.
Oh, also, two things before we go any further. Sure. I didn't do extensive research, but I couldn't find out for sure if it was Nishizawa or Wakasa who designed the overall aesthetic for Godzilla 2000. I'll find out on my own time when we're done recording. Okay. But I couldn't find a thing just like cursorily skimming right now. The second point I want to make is this is also kind of like a mark of Godzilla 2000's general considered to be a failure. Takao Okawara directed nothing after Godzilla 2000.
Ouch.
Nothing. No Godzilla, no special effects films, no drama films, nothing whatsoever. And that was 20 years ago now.
Makes you wonder what he's been doing since then. Like, did he just give up on movies overall and just, like, I don't know, open a noodle shop afterwards?
Well, at the time of the film's release, he stated that he was done with monster pictures, but he wanted to make more films, kind of like his crime thriller Abduction. But obviously those things never happened. And I wouldn't be surprised if the reception to Godzilla 2000 was a factor into why his career basically just died after this film. Yeah, which is too bad, because I think by this point he was getting really good to the point where I think he could have had a really with the right collaborators probably could have had a pretty impressive continuing career, but it appears to have ended on a high note, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah, it's unfortunate when someone in Hollywood, they have their career just like peter out unceremoniously and just sort of fade into obscurity. But I will say, as fans, I'm sure there's a good portion of people out there who will appreciate his contributions to Japan's greatest icon.
And even though I was kind of like, even though I've sort of backhanded a lot of his earlier films, even though I'm not too fond of his work in the Heisei series in general, I do think the man had some merit. I don't think he was ideal for Godzilla movie. Godzilla. I think he probably would have been better off doing other things. But he had merit, and I am curious, what might he have done, had his career continued, because he did have some good things going for him, and he made a few films that I am genuinely fond of. Yeah. So I am kind of sad to see that his career just never advanced past this one movie.
Right. So moving on ahead with Godzilla vs. Megaguirus, the first major reboot right after Godzilla 2000. It's like so apparently, like, Kenji Suzuki, he's back as the special effects director for the second and sadly final time. And you got a new director, Masaki Tezuka, who you mentioned before is someone who did not like the 2000s Millennium film. And overall, it's like you got some we also got what's her name, Miss Oshima, doing the score, right?
Yes.
Okay. So it's like you've got here the ink, like the inkings, like you got the cliff notes of some really good ideas for a good Godzilla movie that would later, I would see, get like resurrected and be reinvigorated through the Mechagodzilla duology 2 years later.
Mm-hmm.
But this project, man, it's like, what the hell happened to make it feel so lackluster?
And here's the very funny thing, and this will shock you, I'm sure.
Okay.
The people who worked on this film are genuinely proud of it, actually.
Oh no!
Even though the film did not do good business, Tezuka is very fond of it. Tomiyama is very fond of it. The two screenwriters, Wataru Mimura and Hiroshi Kashiwabara.
Well, I suppose. Sorry, go ahead.
Who also co-wrote Godzilla 2000. They both agree that Megaguirus is their best effort as far as Godzilla
go. Oh God, really?
It's kind of, from what I understand, again, secondhand. Even though Godzilla vs. Megaguirus did not do as good box office wise as Godzilla 2000, supposedly in Japan it was better received by fans.
Why?
Apparently,
what did they see in this?
Well, it sounds like they thought it was just a bright, colorful Showa style movie, and they thought it was just a lot less murky and drab and slow going than Godzilla 2000 was. Again, that's secondhand. I don't know.
Right.
I don't have the quotes in front of me to verify.
True.
That's what I've heard.
In a way, I can sort of see that, where it's like it's everything is said in the daytime. The monster designs are more brightly colored. You got more sci-fi elements, such as the G-Graspers, which is sort of like a leftover of the G-Force concept. By the way, G-Graspers, ever since I heard that name, all I can think of is Godzilla getting a physical checkup. I don't know, when I hear G-Graspers, I just think of, all right, Godzilla, turn your head and cough. I know, it's a very immature observation, but I felt like I needed to say that.
Well, hey, he got blasted in the balls in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, so he probably has to go for a checkup every now and then. Oh
yeah. Well, and remember, he got dropped. He got dropped groin first on a electrical tower.
Yeah, exactly. And even though and also Nakajima, who played Godzilla in that film, previously played Varan.
Oh yeah.
With those explosions.
He definitely need to get a physical after that. So, with Godzilla vs. Megaguirus, I guess, from what you're telling me, was better received than Millennium, even though it didn't make as much money. Other than that, it's like there's not really much more I can say about the movie because it just feels so lackluster. It felt so half-assed, even though apparently people were giving it their all here. Which is the exact opposite of what got the next film feels like, where it did feel like everyone was giving it their all. But the most disappointing aspect of this movie was it had a really cool premise where it's like, what if the original 1954 Godzilla never died? What if there was never an oxygen destroyer to begin with? So I thought that could open the doors for a very interesting timeline where Godzilla, say, could have gotten stronger as a result of continuing to live and exist. And what if, in this timeline, Dr. Serizawa was still alive in this continuity and came back and said, it's like, 40 years ago, I created the oxygen destroyer, but I hid it away from my friends and family. Now it's time for me to undo the sins of the past. How badass would have been? It's like, but they really did nothing with that concept other than Godzilla attacked nuclear what he planned, so they switched to plasma. He attacked plasma energy, so they moved to something else, and he's attacking. It's like they try to do it feels like a carryover from Godzilla 2000 Millennium, where Godzilla's motivation seems to be, I'm going to screw over Japan by attacking its energy resources, like electrical power plants. And so it's a very interesting concept for Godzilla to intentionally screw over humanity by attacking their most vital resources. And Godzilla seems to do that here as well, but they do nothing with it. In fact, the whole idea of it being like the original 1954 Godzilla doesn't feel like reflected at all, because that's not Godzilla 54 that we see on screen, so that message is lost. In fact, it's like, if you were to take out that whole backstory completely, this easily could have been a sequel to Godzilla 2000. Because the backstory factors so little into this plot. And the idea, I mentioned before, like, it feels like this is a movie where it feels like it had concepts that were done better in other films, especially with the idea of a more militaristic human story. You got the female protagonist whose commander was killed in action by Godzilla, and she's all for revenge. Again, it's completely rehashed for Mechagodzilla, but done so much better, I believe. Whereas everything here just feels like standard and by the numbers. It also feels the whole idea of it being set in broad daylight makes the whole thing feel cheaper as well. This feels more like a movie, an Ultraman movie, than it does a Godzilla movie. It just sort of has that slightly enhanced TV quality that, we criticize the Versus series for having.
As far as Mega... Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's all I can really say about it. So if you have anything else you'd like to add before we move on.
I've got a lot of things I want to say about this film, actually.
Okay.
Number one, I do think that, according to Masaki Tezuka's statements, his testimony would actually support the idea that Toho, from the start, wanted multiple creative teams working on the first three films in the Millennium series. Because, according to him, he was asked to direct this film while Godzilla 2000 was still being made.
Okay.
So, right from the start, they had plans for Okawara not being involved in the next picture.
Okay.
So, and they wanted somebody totally different.
I would say that would help them with their yearly release schedule by having different teams work on different movies at the same time, similar to what like Marvel does with their MCU movies, or what like Disney does with its Star Wars films.
Yeah, they weren't made they weren't made simultaneously, but they had a director for the next film already selected by the time Godzilla 2000 was already in production and such. As for Tezuka, this was his very first movie. He'd been an assistant director for a long time. And again, just like Okawara and Yamashita from the previous series, Tezuka grew up in that era where an AD at Toho basically meant that you were just literally an assistant. You helped out on the set. You helped out the director. It wasn't in like Honda's day where you were meticulously trained how to become a filmmaker. He didn't have that. Working on Toho did not mean that he got firsthand experience on firsthand training on how to make pictures. He got Tezuka. He is a prime. Tezuka is, here's another thing. Tezuka is a huge Godzilla fan. Yeah, he had nothing but hatefulness for Godzilla 2000, but he loves the character, in particular the Showa series. Which does show in Godzilla in Megaguirus. One thing that Tezuka always does is that he always has a Showa veteran play like a wise authority figure in his films. In this case, you have Yuriko Hoshi playing the scientist who kickstarts the Dimension Tide project. In Godzilla X Mechagodzilla, you have Kumi Mizuno as the prime minister who kickstarts the project to make Mechagodzilla. In Tokyo SOS, you have Hiroshi Koizumi trying to convey the message of stop using Mechagodzilla before Mothra attacks civilization and such. So you got that. And Megaguirus is definitely a much more lighthearted, whimsical, not too serious kind of picture. It's very much trying to reflect the sort of Showa era aesthetic sort of thing. Which does clearly stem from Tezuka's affinity for the old movies. But I do think it's fair to say that his complete inexperience is what diminishes this film quite considerably. Here's as for my stance on Megaguirus, I don't absolutely resent the film like most people seem to.
Like Andrew.
Like Andrew. I liked it more when I was younger. Watching it again, I like parts of the movie a lot, but it doesn't quite come together and work. In particular, the first hour I think is really slow going. It's just that I agree with you as far as what you said about like lost potential.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a problem for me in theory or in principle. Mm-hmm. My big problem with Megaguirus in the first hour is that it's just really slow going, and it doesn't have very much focus, and the characters are just not very interesting. And as a result, the film just kind of like meanders along, and it's not really until like a full hour before like the monster action like starts coming in full force.
Right.
Like Godzilla's skirmish with the Mega Nula is not until like an hour into it, and it's kind of a slow going thing. And actually, and for me, there are the parts of the film that come alive for me are actually the special effects sequences, and yeah, they are very they're not very polished, but they're very imaginatively shot and put together. Like that opening sequence where Godzilla is combating with that foot soldier squadron in Osaka.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of really good camera angles and all interesting ways of shooting that sequence. Like lots of great shots where Godzilla's like backlit by a red sky. There's that cool moment where we see like a shot down an alleyway as like a car comes sailing down the street on fire as Godzilla kicks it. And also the final battle, even though Megaguirus herself is not particularly well executed, even though Kawakita's flying monsters were no better, if you ask me.
which really sucks because I thought Kenji Suzuki did a much better job with Mothra than Kawakita ever did. Only to see him repeating the same mistakes as his senior with this movie. Yeah. It's like, what happened, Kenji?
But at the same time, in the final battle, I do like that it's that Megaguirus is so nimble and fast that Godzilla has to resort to like being smart and using strategy in order to take her out. Because physically he can blast her with one hit of his breath and just kill her, but she's so fast and nimble like a ninja that he has to outsmart her. And I like that. And also, I do think that this might be controversial, but I do think actually that this is actually Tsutomu Kitagawa's best performance as Godzilla.
We never mentioned that. Yeah, starting in Godzilla 2000, we have Kitagawa taking over the mantle of being the Godzilla suit actor, and there's not much for me I can say about his performance other than he does really give the Godzilla more animalistic approach for his Godzilla, especially with like the hunched over, ready to pounce position that he gives. And I think he does a great job. And while the Godzilla suits, especially early on, were very, kind of restrictive, especially around the neck area, I feel like he did a lot of emoting with the even with the limitations of that suit, of those early Millennium suits.
Mm-hmm. Like one thing that the special effects crew said one thing the special effects crew said that they got wrong with 2000 was that Godzilla was too sluggish and lethargic, and they wanted to fix that with Megaguirus. And so Kitagawa, under Suzuki's direction, gave Godzilla this very quick thinking and very nuanced performance. Like he injects a lot of personality into Godzilla with just like little movements of the shoulders and the arms. And I love how in this film, when Godzilla roars at Megaguirus for charging, he kind of like goes in like sort of like a crouching position as he roars at her, and the head just kind of like tilts forward. I love little details like that. It just makes Godzilla seem more alive and personable in this film. And again, this is not the best film that Kitagawa worked in, but I do think that this is his best overall performance as Godzilla, because he just makes Godzilla seem more nuanced and lively and quick thinking, as opposed to some of the films that will follow. So I do like that. I do like that aspect about the film. Oshima's score is beyond amazing. I guess what I'm trying to get at is that when the monsters are on screen, the film kind of perks up for me. But when the monsters are not on screen, the film just kind of drags. And I think again that's just because the film doesn't have good characters, and Tezuka's direction is just not as focused as this kind of film needed.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you there. So, you ready to move on to the next film?
Sure.
So we have ourselves Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters, All Out Attack, directed by Shusuke Kaneko, coming, right off the heels of the 90s Gamera trilogy. And, most people tend to think that Shinji Higuchi was also the special effects person for this movie, when actually that isn't the case, where we actually have Makoto Kamiya, who I believe may have been the assistant director of the Gamera trilogy.
Correct.
So this was his time. It's very interesting how this really goes to show you, the sort of the Japanese system of, the Japanese work environment, where you don't really, it's not really a merit-based system where it's if you prove yourself to be the very best, no one ever was, you'll get that position. Rather, this is more based on if you follow your senpai, then you will eventually take over once your senpai eventually retires. So we have a lot of people who worked as special effects assistant special effects directors working under the special effects director, and once they step down, the assistant directors eventually take the spot. So it's it feels to me it's usually, I get the idea, at least from my experiences living in Japan, where it's there's no question about it, there's no doubt about it. If you are the number 2 guy, there's no question about it, you're going to become the next number 1 guy.
Yeah, and also going back to the Showa series, Sadamasa Arikawa was Tsuburuya's chief cameraman, and so it's not so surprising that after Tsuburaya started to shift his attention back to his own company, that Arikawa kind of got promoted to being special effects director with Sea Monster and Son of Godzilla and Destroy All Monsters.
Right, it's a very simple system for them, I guess, that works to this day, that they believe. So
in the case of GMK, Higuchi was working on a war picture, I think, and so he was not available to participate in this film. So Kamiya got the job instead.
I see. Now, I may have heard, this could be wrong, but Higuchi gave some pointers or gave some advice in terms of the special effects for GMK, or did he have absolute zero involvement?
He helped out with some storyboarding for a couple of moments, but he was not on the set, doing things.
Okay, I also heard he was uncredited for his involvement.
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
Again, it was very minimal, storyboarding kind of things.
Right. Where maybe he planned out some choreography and drew some stuff. It's okay, what if we had this monster here do this thing against this other monster?
I think give me 5 seconds to check. I believe he helped storyboard the jet fighter sequence.
Oh, okay.
Let me just verify really quick.
Yeah, that'd be cool. But yeah, for Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack, for once, I find it very funny that of all the times American distributors have ignored the Japanese titles of these movies, I'm very surprised they went with a literal translation of the Japanese title here, which I believe, this was a title that was meant to be a throwback to the old school Showa movie titles, Godzilla, Mothra, Ebirah, Great Battle in the South Seas, or whatever, or something like that. So yeah, I have this one's title just sticks out like a sore thumb amongst all the other compressed titles. So I don't know what Sony was thinking. Maybe they were someone at Sony was in on the joke and was let's do it. But
and just to answer the question from earlier, yes, Shinji Higuchi worked on the storyboards for the jet fighter sequence in GMK.
Okay, thank you very much, dude. And I would say, unlike Godzilla vs. Megaguirus, where it really did nothing with its alternate universe status quo, I feel like Godzilla GMK did took advantage of the fact that it's a one-off anthology Godzilla film more than any other film in the Millennium series.
Oh yeah.
And how do they differentiate their continuity? By introducing magic. Now, I think magic has always been sort of a thing that was kind of hinted at in past Godzilla movies, with Biollante and Mothra, but this is the full-on, we got spirits and ghosts and magical guardians fighting the forces of evil and stuff. And I gotta say, it really makes one of the most unique entries in the Godzilla franchise, and I'm so glad that someone like Shizuke Kaneko was here to, like, give this the attention it deserved, to craft such a beautiful story, sort of like a generational tale of, you know, old Japanese history and the younger generation who are far removed from the old to remember the old generation, and Godzilla coming back to remind Japan of the past, of punishing them for forgetting the sacrifices of the past. It really speaks a lot, like, on how would you call it, on a metatextual level with this film. And it kind of reminds me a bit sort of like how would I call it? Maybe a little bit like Grave of the Fireflies, in terms of, like, reminding audiences the struggles that people went through back in the day. It's very profound, and it's something that you don't really see in the rest of the movies, which tend to go more in the... It's funny, I was going to say most of the movies go in a fantasy direction, but here it technically is fantasy, but also has some strong social commentary.
Mm-hmm. And it's a real testament to Shusuke Kaneko's strength as a filmmaker that he made such a strong film, even though his vision for the film was being compromised by the front office.
That is true, yeah. And you know what? Other than his choice of monsters, were there any other compromises? Because I feel like even with the fact that Anguirus and Varan were replaced by Mothra and Ghidorah, I still feel like the movie itself still would have felt the same either way.
Well, one thing that Kaneko wanted to do, because, you know, the key theme of GMK is reminding Japan of the atrocities committed during World War II.
Uh-huh.
You know, Godzilla does not just represent the Japanese soldiers who died in World War II. He's embodied by the spirits of everybody who died in the Pacific War.
Oh, okay. I forgot that detail.
Mm-hmm. And there were and Kaneko wanted to go in some cases a little more detail, a little more depth with his theme in that. Like, for example, he wanted a sequence where Godzilla destroyed Yasukuni Jinja, if you're familiar with that.
Unfortunately, I am not.
Well, look it up, and you'll find out very quickly how that would have been a big spit in the face to Japan's militaristic past. But, you know, Toho said, no, that's pushing it too hard. We can't do that, which is not surprising. You know, from the very beginning, the Godzilla series has been kind of forbidden by the front office for destroying.
It was a shrine that was built to commemorate those who died in service of Japan from the Boshin War of 1868 to 1869 to the first Indochina War of 1946 to 1954.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh.
So yeah, imagine the controversy if Godzilla had been able to destroy that on screen.
Yeah, it's like, fuck you for forcing us to join your stupid militaristic society.
Yeah, and from the beginning, you know, the Godzilla series has been kind of like, you know, it's been kind of destroying landmarks like imperial palaces and such have been kind of like, you know, sort of like a no-no in this franchise.
Oh, so you're right. You don't really see any shrines get destroyed. It's usually like modern buildings.
Mm-hmm. I mean, sometimes you'll see like castles get destroyed, but not like, you know, things that are like tied to like, you know, Japan's imperialistic background.
That would have been really ballsy of Kaneko to have still have done that.
Yeah, yep. And he wanted to do some things like that, but you know, the front office, you know, ixnayed that, and so that it happened. But he still got his message through all the same in the film, which is you know, that's what GMK is about. You know, it's basically, you know, war does nobody any good.
Okay, because like from the first viewing, I thought that GMK was mostly like a criticism of today's generation, or quote unquote today's generation from 18 years prior, but yeah, it's interesting that this is a movie that's actually meant to be more critical to the young and older generations of Japan.
You know, and also like the key example is what Kaneko was going for is when Commander Tachibana is preparing for the final battle. Like, you know, the dialogue in that sequence is very somber. It's very ominous. Like they're not looking forward to going to war.
Yeah.
They're not looking forward to going to battle. And it's what they're doing is they're defending their country. And also, and here's a prime example as to what Kaneko was going for in an earlier sequence. And this is a case where where the wonderful dub and dub titles that apply to every Region 1 release of this film.
Uh-huh.
Remember in the dub/dub titles where the civilians are evacuating, and that guy and that girl come along and go, "Hey, good luck, everybody! You're all gonna die!" Ha 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 ha. Remember that?
Oh yeah.
Well, in the original Japanese version, the boy is actually I believe he's either Korean or Chinese, and he's shouting out in his native tongue, "Good luck," and the girl is translating it into Japanese for him.
Okay.
There was no ah ha ha, you're all gonna die, and that was just basically Kaneko's way of saying, if the cause is just, even foreigners will support the Japanese military.
I see.
In defending their country. And that's what Kaneko. It's a very pacifistic film, which is basically about the wrongs of the past we should learn from the past and not repeat the bad parts of our past history.
Right.
That's basically it's basically like the themes of the original Godzilla just kind of modernized in a contemporary context.
Right, with a more fantastical backdrop than instead of science fiction.
Godzilla being the embodiment of the souls who died in the war is not just different for the sake of being different. It's different with a larger point being made. Which is one of many reasons why this film rates very high for me.
Oh yeah, same for me too. It's definitely up there. And it's no wonder at all why this is viewed as like one of the best Godzilla movies, if not the best, after the original 54 installment.
Yeah, it's certainly this film is definitely I'd say one of the 2 or 3 best films made since the Showa series. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And it's really cool to see Shusuke Kaneko not only do such a bang-up job with Gamera, but to see that he was able to do the same with Godzilla itself. For him to be lucky enough to have bring out the best of from both characters.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, and to leave such an amazing mark on in this fandom / community.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I credit to, of course, not just him, but him and his entire team as well.
Oh yeah,
they really I think Toho really struck gold here by getting the perfect team of all the people so far.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as we move on to the next 2 films, for whatever reason, they decided to go with a duology this time around, where we have yet another continuity. But this is a very interesting continuity, where it seems like this is meant to be a spiritual sequel to the Showa continuity, minus most of Godzilla's Showa activities. Where, again, Godzilla, the original 54 died, and in that time there have been plenty of other monsters showing up in Japan, from Gaira to Mothra, and I guess what do you call it? Extra promotional material or promotional material suggests that pretty much every single non-Godzilla kaiju film is from the Showa era is actually a part of this continuity. From Mothra all the way to Space Amoeba. So it's a very interesting backdrop. I love the reveal of the Maser cannon to show, we're back in the Showa era. And it's a very fun ride to go through this duology. Although I would say it's definitely a bit lopsided. It's especially in terms of I think Tokyo SOS really tries to connect itself to its nostalgic past. Whereas Mechagodzilla was more prioritized itself more on its main female heroine. Mm-hmm. And so it's both movies have their strengths and weaknesses, but together I think they tell a story that's pretty solid for the most part. And I do really love their take on Mechagodzilla this time around.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and like I mentioned before, I feel like what Masaki Tezuka did with Megaguirus, he really, in terms of making a more like action-packed, sci-fi-driven, militaristic, focused Godzilla movie, he really was able to do what he set out to accomplish before, but he really was able to be more successful at it with Mechagodzilla. I don't know if he had any experience between both films, but he must have learned something, because I feel like, yeah, this was a huge improvement over his last outing.
Well, this was his second movie, so he actually made nothing in between. And it's in a lot of ways, Godzilla x Mechagodzilla is kind of like a loose remake of Megaguirus. It begins with a young female soldier whose comrades are killed by Godzilla.
Right.
There is a nerdy, socially awkward civilian who is recruited by the military to help out with some big Godzilla extermination project.
Yeah.
Just like in Megaguirus.
And there's some romantic tension between the two of them.
Yep. You've got a little girl who bonds with the main female soldier. Well, a little kid. It was a boy in Megaguirus and a girl here. A kid who bonds with the main female soldier.
Right, and she has a much larger impact in the story this time around, as opposed to the kid who like fucks off halfway through the movie.
and it's basically like it's and both films are kind of like a quest for redemption for both of them.
Oh yeah, in
totally. Both cases.
Yeah.
So it's basically like it's sort of like a loose remake of Megaguirus, just done better. Better story. It's just better made, and it's just more polished, and it's just more satisfying.
Now, according to Wikipedia, we have two new special effects director. We have Yuichi Kikuchi and Eiichi Asada. Do you happen to know any information on these two individuals and where they came from?
First I'll say first and foremost that the reason why we should probably mention why Kenji Suzuki never came back for this film.
Right.
And that's largely because of the the most everybody's favorite moment in Megaguirus, the body slam.
Okay, so how does that factor in?
That was actually Suzuki's idea to use that sequence. Tezuka did not want to use that one that scene of the film.
He's like, I got an idea that'll top the tail drop kick from Megalon.
And from what I understand, it was a nod to Tsutomu Kitagawa's past working in the Super Sentai franchise. Okay. From what I understand. I don't know. I'm not a Sentai expert, but that's what I've heard. Even
as a Power Rangers fan, I can't think of any moment where a Megazord body slams a monster.
But in any event, Tezuka did not want to use that sequence. But however, before the film had been made, there was an agreement between Tezuka and Suzuki that as long as Suzuki stayed within his budget, he could do what he wanted with the special effects sequences. Uh-huh. So per that agreement, the body slam was allowed to keep in. Okay. Was allowed to stay in the film. And because of that, Tezuka did not ask him back for Godzilla x Mechagodzilla.
Okay, so it's like, fuck you and your stupid body slamming bullshit. I'm going with the new guy.
Yeah, I mean, he did give Suzuki a cameo in the film. Suzuki plays one of the Maser Tank operators in the film.
Okay.
So it wasn't totally vitriolic, but Tezuka's like, no, I don't want that. I don't want a repeat of that happening. So we'll get somebody else.
Meanwhile, Kenji Suzuki was like, fine, I don't need your stupid Godzilla films.
Yeah, and so Yuichi Kikuchi comes in, and actually, I recently rewatched this film, and what I was really taken by his work in this film is that the low angle photography in this picture is really spectacular. Mm-hmm. There's lots of really great low angle shots, especially like there's this shot where Mechagodzilla has Godzilla by the head is pushing him backward down the street, and they film it from like street level with all these like street lamps and telephone wires in the foreground. I mean, the sense of scale is just terrific, and like that opening sequence in the rain is just absolutely stunning.
Oh, yeah. That low angle shot of like Godzilla roaring into the sky with lightning in the background, his spine's flickering. Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, I would say like this is easily my favorite Godzilla design of all time. Like, I love the G2K design from the get-go. So to take the G2K design, slim it down, and give it the blue fire, the blue atomic breath, and the charcoal gray look of the classic Godzilla was like the perfect combination there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is like the version of Godzilla we would go on to see in a lot of the IDW comics where Matt Frank is involved in creating a Godzilla. This is definitely like his his like personal Godzilla was easily like inspired off of this version, based off of this version.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you a question out of curiosity. Do you see a lot of like anime-esque elements in this film?
Funny enough, I do recall a Toho Kingdom review describing a lot of the typical anime tropes to Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. I'm not sure if you wrote that yourself.
I did not write that, no.
Okay. But yes, ever since I read that review on Toho Kingdom, I do kind of see it here. Even though we do kind of have a similar backdrop, a similar character, a similar set of characters to Godzilla vs. Megaguirus, the way it's executed here does feel rather typical of like a typical like drama in like sort of like a how would you call it, drama, like a anime drama, or like even like from what little I've seen of live action Japanese drama shows, they also feel very anime-esque, whether it's sort of like the not too exaggerated, but still exaggerated enough for it to capture the raw emotion of certain characters. I do get that vibe a lot, whether it's like the stone cold protagonist with a dark past, the awkward, lovesick dude who's trying to get the girl in the end. You got, the crazy kung fu action of Mechagodzilla, spinning, jumping, kicking around Godzilla. I do get that sort of anime influence in this film as well. Just like you.
But here's the plot twist though.
Okay.
Masaki Tezuka claims that he's not an anime fan and has never seen like even Evangelion, for instance.
Okay.
So that's it. So that's very interesting. That we draw a lot of these comparisons when he himself is not influenced by that kind of thing.
Yeah, that is interesting. It makes me wonder if Yuichi or Eiichi, either of them were influenced, at least for the special effects sequences. And if not, maybe Masaki Tezuka, it's possible that maybe he was never directly influenced by it, but maybe he was like he may have been exposed to it in some minor way, shape, or form, and that sort of like subconsciously influenced his style.
And here's where things get really funny, though, is that a couple years after he was done with Godzilla, he made a live action version of the anime Rescue Wings.
Okay.
And when you watch Rescue Wings, you'll notice a lot of the same beats as Godzilla x Mechagodzilla.
Oh, really?
I'll just run this down for you. So we have a lonely female soldier.
Okay.
who kind of screws up in the beginning of the film.
All right.
And who has to prove her, and who is supported mostly just by her commanding officer, and who has to, at the end of the day, save everybody in a big military operation in which she finally achieves her redemption.
Okay, does this guy just know how to do one story throughout his career?
That's the fun. That is the thing. Tezuka. That's one thing I'll give Tezuka. I don't think he's one of the best Godzilla directors, but he's definitely one of the most He's one of the most consistent.
That's true.
His movies kind of have the same sort of beats to them all the time. They always focus on like militaristic characters, characters that have to prove themselves at some point. You've got overcoming love interests who are oftentimes very much the same.
Yeah.
Also his one other non-Godzilla picture, a film called Samurai Commando Mission 1549.
Okay.
Does this sound familiar to you at all?
Oh boy.
A female soldier screws up in the beginning and has to make a mission, and has to go on a mission to redeem herself, and a scientific civilian guy who is brought in by the military to help out with a big secret military project. Does that sound familiar to you whatsoever?
Masaki, you hack!
he's very, very consistent. I'll give him that.
Maybe that's like in his idea, that's like the greatest story ever told, and he just wants to keep doing it until he has perfected it.
I guess so.
Although according to what you said, he thinks he already perfected it with Megaguirus.
He's never apologized for that one. Tokyo SOS is his favorite of his Godzilla films.
That is very interesting because it's like he replaces one female character with another female character, I think, but then the male character sort of takes over, and that male character is nowhere near as interesting because it's like, all right, I already told my favorite story ever told. Shit, what do I do? Is it really you don't want to continue developing that character? You're just gonna have her just leave and go to the United States. It's like you have Mechagodzilla. She's the best person to pilot Mechagodzilla. Why would you let her go at this vital moment? You're gonna get let some goofball take over.
And that's what I've been saying since I first saw Tokyo SOS, 10 plus years ago.
Yeah, like I would say like the whole idea with the returning actor from Mothra, and as well as a good portion of the Godzilla movies, having him return and having teaching his grandson about Mothra and him reuniting with the Shobijin, the fairies, and everything involving Mothra, I feel like was a lot more interesting than anything going on with Mechagodzilla's team.
Mm-hmm. And it's sad because I do like the female lead of Godzilla X Mechagodzilla. I like that character.
Yeah.
And I think she does still shine in her few moments that she has in Tokyo.
Oh yeah.
Like there's this wonderful little moment where she right before she leaves for America, she goes into the hangar where Kiryu's at. She talks to the mechanic guy, and she says, please take care of it. And she walks off. And there's this great moment where she just kind of pauses and just kind of bows her head, and you can tell without even seeing her face that her demons are not fully resolved still, and there's still more to her story.
Right.
That's why it's so frustrating that she disappears and never comes back.
At least you could say that's more than what they did for Miki Sagusa.
Yes, that is true. That is absolutely true.
Yeah, it makes me wonder what exactly was she doing in the United States? Was she piloting? I know they said she was training the soldiers in America, but is she training them to pilot their own giant robot? Is Mogira or Jet Jaguar getting built in America?
Who knows?
Yeah. And I feel like with the ending of Tokyo SOS, there could have been room for more stories within this Showa backdrop continuity. Yeah, especially with
contrary to what's been misreported, there was never a plan for a third Kiryu film.
Okay.
That's been denied by both Tezuka and Shogo Tomiyama.
Okay.
The final the epilogue, which funny enough, that's another thing that's about Tezuka's 3 Godzilla films. They all have an epilogue to them.
Oh yeah.
The epilogue in Tokyo SOS is just kind of like a dun dun dun. The story continues kind of thing. It's not
humanity will never learn.
Yeah, it wasn't meant to lead into a third Kiryu film.
Yeah.
Tokyo SOS is the ending for this the timeline of the Kiryu duology.
Right, where Kiryu, for whatever reason, Kiryu goes through a dramatic personality shift here between movies. And so it's like, instead of wanting to continue, for Godzilla 54 to continue its rampage on humanity, it just wants to go back to sleep and take his brethren with him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's the duology. I would say it's a valiant effort. And I would say it's nowhere near as strong narrative-wise as GMK. I mean, GMK is such a strong act to follow, but
yeah,
with what it's got, I feel like while Tokyo SOS does suffer a lot story-wise, I feel like it does at the very least complement Godzilla X Mechagodzilla or Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, and both of them serve as a fine pair of Godzilla films that I feel like definitely do a lot to, again, continue the trend of resurrecting older characters and bringing them back for a new generation, and have proven to be very influential in terms of the portrayal of both characters and what you can do with characters in a militaristic setting. Something I feel like 2014 could have learned from.
Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, before we press forward, do we want to talk about the very interesting marketing techniques of, or rather the theatrical distribution techniques behind GMK and the Kiryu films?
From what I understand, I could be wrong here, they decided to pair up these movies as double billed features, usually often pairing up Godzilla with Hamtaro of all franchises.
Yes. And that's the funny thing is that people always the thing is that GMK was the most successful film of the Millennium series.
Oh really? Okay. I thought it was. I got the vibe that Toho did not like this version of Godzilla.
It sold 2.7 million tickets, which is respectable. It wasn't like through the roof, but it was still better than Godzilla 2000 and Megaguirus and such.
Okay.
And the impression at the time was that it was because it was double billed with a Hamtaro cartoon,
right? Which was big back in the day, and of course, Japan loves their cute shit.
Mm-hmm. And so they continued, and so they did the exact same thing with Godzilla X Mechagodzilla and Tokyo SOS. But here's the thing: the Kiryu films did not do very well box office wise.
Oh.
So I think I think it just shows that Tomoyama overestimated the popularity of, or rather the box office assistance that Hamtaro gave GMK. GMK clearly did what it did because people liked it and it got a good vibe. Hamtaro be damned, because again because the Kiryu films had the exact same theatrical gimmick to go theatrical distribution gimmick to go with them. And neither of those films did stellar at all.
Let's see. So, I guess I in a way I can understand this. Would be how would I say? This would influence Toho to make Godzilla Final Wars their next Godzilla film to be the last one, and for them just to say, okay, so doing a throwback didn't work. So what if instead of looking to the past, we look to the future and get someone who is very much so inspired by the modern age of American action films, and get someone like Ryohei Kitamura and someone who can do something again, do a radical new take on it. And again, this is what I appreciate at least when it comes to the anthology approach of letting each director sort of do their own thing. Which Shusuke Kaneko, he told a very generational fantasy, sci-fi fantasy film. Takao Okawara did something that was more line of a Showa throwback. Masaki Tezuka did more militaristic themed Godzilla films. And Ryuhei Kitamura, he essentially made The Matrix with Godzilla, with Godzilla in the background. So, am I correct into assuming that Toho made Godzilla Final Wars to be the last final hurrah for a while?
Yes, and from my understanding, it sounds like they had no plans of making a Godzilla film again for indefinitely after this point.
And it's a very good idea because, unfortunately for them, Godzilla Final Wars turned out to be, last I checked, the biggest financial bomb for the entire franchise.
Yep, it is the third lowest attended film in the entire franchise in terms of attendance.
Right.
And given its huge budget, which was 19.5 million yen, I believe, which was gigantic.
Right.
Almost twice as big as the other Millennium films. Considering that was a huge loss for them in terms of the budget and the profits and such.
Let's see, 19.5 million Japanese yen to US dollars. That would be about around $178,000. That doesn't sound right to me.
Don't forget, it's also 2004 currency.
Yeah. Maybe if I put in 2004 into Google. Let's see. Going to check right here. Let's see. Going to be a little bit different here, so it might take me a while to see how much it would cost, but I am curious to know whether or not this movie is more or less expensive than Shin Godzilla was, because I understand Shin Godzilla
it was more expensive.
More expensive, okay, because with Shin Godzilla, this was like the equivalent of like $5 million, I think. I could be wrong.
I think it was made for let's see.
Because I do know, like, yeah, Shin Godzilla was made for like essentially chump change. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
it was $15 million.
Okay.
Yeah, so Shin Godzilla was $15 million. So in 2004 money, Final Wars had to be much more than that, I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, like, Shin Godzilla itself was, like, majority of the movie was just shot in boardrooms.
Yeah.
for the most part. But yeah, Final Wars, Godzilla Final Wars. I know, like, you have strong feelings about this movie. I am rather kind of apathetic to the movie. I know someone like David is a huge fan of it. This movie has definitely got a wide variety of reactions from people. Either people love it, people hate it, people are indifferent to it. It's pretty much so. It's got a very unique style compared to every other Godzilla film before and since, and it's really one of those like take it or leave it sort of styles. Either it's for either this kind of sort of thing is for you or it's not. And what this style is exactly is just nonstop action, very little focus on characters, a very extremely fast pacing, and a huge focus on martial arts action over giant monster action. And I get the feeling that Ryuhei Kitamura, he just did this as a way to further his own career and really had no interest in Godzilla to begin with, and just wanted to show off his cool Matrix-esque style of fight choreography that he sort of showed off with his previous film Versus.
Kitamura's the way he talks about the past Godzilla films, it kind of changes depending on when you're asking him.
Oh, okay.
Because in some interviews, he'll say that he thought the Godzilla series was great up through the 1980s, and was terrible after that point. Okay. In some interviews, he'll say that the 70s Godzilla films were his favorites. But then in other interviews, he'll say, like for example, his interview with Nerd Culture, he'll say that I don't want a film where Godzilla saves the world because I'm not a big fan of superhero Godzilla. Even though the 70s Godzilla films are all superhero Godzilla.
And he essentially had Godzilla save the world for Final Wars.
Yeah. But he's always been very consistent in saying that he does not like the films made from like the 90s and forward.
Yeah.
And he told Toho that from the beginning. That he doesn't like go to see Godzilla films anymore.
Right.
And I think it really is. It was more like a career move for him more than anything else. Make this big expensive film that's going to have its premiere in Hollywood of all places, where he would prefer to work as opposed to Japan.
Right. Did he ever ended up going to America? Because I know he made a couple of Japanese movies, especially a live action Lupin the Third movie.
I haven't followed his stuff in a long time, so I don't know what he's done. If he made a few LA films, but I'm not a Kitamura follower.
Really now?
So I don't spend a lot of time following what he does. So
let's see. I'm trying to look through his movie list here. He did The Midnight Meat Train in 2008. It stars Bradley Cooper, so I'm guessing this is more of an American movie. He did a movie called No One Lives, which is another American horror film. We have Downrange, an American horror thriller film. And we have Nightmare Cinema from 2018. Okay, so a good portion of his movies have been like American horror or American horror thriller movies. So I guess he did got to accomplish his dreams of moving to Hollywood. Although I don't know if it's Hollywood or maybe it's like some small little indie thing, but good on him, I guess. So let's see. Wait, he did Sky High?
Yeah.
No, this is a different Sky High. I'm thinking of the is Sky High that Disney superhero show movie?
It was a movie. The Kitamura film was the one that had Yumiko Shako in it.
Okay. Okay. I'm thinking of the 2005 Sky High featuring what was it? Kurt Russell and his son and his like in movie son as superheroes. Okay, very different one. Yeah. So we got a brand new crazy style here. And do you think, Patrick, that the reason why this movie bombed so hard in Japan was because of Japan's decreasing interest in Godzilla, or was it the disinterest in Godzilla in general, or the disinterest in Ryuhei Kitamura's take on Godzilla?
I think it's largest because at this point, Japan just the Japanese mainstream audience just didn't care about Godzilla, plainly.
Okay.
Yeah, 2000 didn't do very well. Megaguirus did not do well at all. The Kiryu films did not do very well. And again, GMK, it was successful, but it was not a through the roof big hit like the Heisei Mothra film was, or Destroya. So. It's just, I think at this point it's quite clear that the Japanese mainstream public just had no real interest in Godzilla for Godzilla's sake at this point.
Right, and it's like this is showing like how would you call it? The changing of generations, the changing in the overall cultural taste in Japanese mainstream culture. Obviously Godzilla wasn't the cool thing anymore. A lot of people after this movie was made were going to grow up without ever experiencing a single Godzilla film in their life. And maybe there were people who never bothered watching any of these movies to begin with as they were coming out in the early 2000s. So yeah, this is just a sign of the times at this point. And as I mentioned many times before, it continues to this very day. As much as American fans hate to admit it, Godzilla is not popular in Japan. Yes, there's the Godzilla Hotel. Yes, there's the Godzilla store. But keep in mind that kind of stuff is made primarily for tourists, from countries where Godzilla is a recognizable and popular figure.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very unfortunate that Godzilla sort of ended out sort of like this. His popularity petered out as well, and it's kind of a shame because I still feel like while Godzilla Final Wars isn't. I wouldn't call it a great film. I still think it's very entertaining for people whose tastes align with such a film as this. And it is very nice that they tried to end things with a bang. They brought in a lot of a wide variety of actors involved, old and new. They got in. They brought in a whole lot of monsters involved in this movie, some that we haven't seen in forever, as brief as their appearances may be. But of course, we got the greatest contribution to Godzilla Final Wars and the Godzilla fandom as a whole, and that is the one and only Don Frye as Captain Gordon. I feel like he may have started out as like a professional kickboxer, but I feel like he was forever been immortalized as Captain Gordon, and with the most iconic, most badass action line, unironically badass action lines that we have seen in quite some time. And I think he really did solidify the idea of having a very Americanized, action-infused Godzilla film.
Well, here's the thing. He didn't play Captain Gordon. He played himself.
He played himself. He played.
I met Don Frye last year. He is Captain Gordon.
Right.
or rather, Captain Gordon is just Don Frye with a different name.
with a different hat.
Yeah, exactly. And a sword.
And a sword and a trench coat.
Yes.
He's like, there's two things you don't know about me. One is me, the other is me. I thought we kind of already knew that about you, Don Frye. There's two things you don't know about yourself. One is the me, the other is the fact that you don't know about me. It's very, having him visit attend G-Fest every once in a while is always a huge pleasure for fans and hopefully himself as well. And yeah, much like Robert Scott Field, it's great to have an American actor involved who is very eager about like interacting with the fans, and it's a great contribution to the community as a whole. Let's see. Anything else you want to talk about with Godzilla Final Wars? Because it's like, for me, this is another one of those movies where there's not much to talk about, just because it's just nothing but unbridled action and just testosterone-fueled action every moment, and not giving a single damn about anything else.
Well, for me personally, I just I don't dig Ryuhei Kitamura's aesthetic.
Sure.
I don't dig his visual style, his editing style, his sense of humor, his way of working with actors. I find his films to be very they're basically everything I find unpleasant about Michael Bay films, just done a lot worse in my opinion.
It's just like it's just nothing but like ADHD driven, like 88 miles an hour sort of speed. Yeah, it's just taking no time to rest, kind of like taking the rules of cinema and just burning it with a flamethrower.
To me, he doesn't have the redeeming qualities for me like of somebody like Sam Raimi does, who can be very visually stylish but still be entertaining and such, and who can work with actors and get good work out of them. But he doesn't really give that to me. But I will say, if you do like Ryuhei Kitamura's aesthetic, you will get a kick out of Final Wars.
Right.
if you liked Versus, you'll enjoy this.
There is one thing I find, one aspect I don't really enjoy so much about the production of the Gods of Final Wars, and that is the rather strange form-fitting aesthetic that they gave a lot of the monster suits, because I know he wanted the monsters to be as like flexible and energetic and be able to have as much like kinetic frenzy as his human action scenes, so a lot of the monsters are slimmed down. But it's like, I find it very strange because the fight sequences themselves are so awkwardly shot with so many quick cuts. It's kind of hard to even see the monsters move around because the camera is always changing angles every 3 seconds.
Yeah, which is a very Kitamura kind of thing.
Yeah, like the most awkward shot I think in the whole movie would be when Anguirus rolls into a ball. King Caesar kicks the ball, and Godzilla looks like he's trying to grab the ball, but he misses it, and Anguirus slams into a wall and is taken out. So I'm thinking, why did King Caesar kick Anguirus into a wall? Or is it supposed to be that Godzilla pushed Anguirus into that wall, like a goal, like stretching his hands out like a goalie? That's just the thing. It's like, it's really hard. It's like things are moving so fast and everything's like characters aren't going all over the place. It's kind of difficult to tell like just what exactly is happening. Or like Mothra when she gets set on fire and she slams herself into Gigan, and she's never acknowledged at all by any characters, not even the fairies afterwards. So it's like, is she dead? Is she not dead?
Doesn't she appear in like the credits, like flying back to the island?
Yeah, but I feel like those are just like it would be cool if that ending credit sequence is supposed to be like a where are they now?
Then again, the Exilians are also in that credit sequence, like clapping their hands and such, and they're all supposed to be dead. So
yeah, and Hedorah,
so who knows?
And we got some extra sequences of Hedorah just walking around the city, spreading his gas, which is of course something we never see in the movie. And so I feel like that was just like a very awkward collection of like special effects sequence of just deleted scenes that they just shoved into the ending credits. Yeah, and then you have Minya showing up out of nowhere, sort of like to bring some sort of emotional weight to this story. Although, I do like the moment where like the grandfather is trying to explain in basic terms the history of humanity's war with Godzilla to his grandson, where it's like, many years ago, humans made a big fire that made Godzilla angry, and he's attacked us ever since. I thought that was a rather interesting scene right there.
I like the moment where Minya's in the pickup truck with the seatbelt on
him. Because why not?
Because why not? That's basically the whole logic of the film.
How did he grow all of a sudden? Did Ryuhei Kitamura thought that Godzilla's revenge was in continuity? Yeah, that is a thing that happened. And
that's a description of the whole movie.
that's a thing.
The whole movie was a thing.
That was a thing. It happened in 2004, and people still remember it as a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that there marked the end of Godzilla's history in what we call the Millennium series, or what Japan calls the X series. And it was at that point, it was pretty much like a very dead, barren 10 years of Godzilla. So it was during this time where for all of us growing up at that time, for us, there only ever was 28 Godzilla movies, or I guess 29 if you count the American Godzilla film. So those 29 were all that ever was, and for what we thought, all that ever would be.
Yeah.
And it's kind of crazy now that at this point, we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Godzilla movies since then. We had 2 Hollywood movies, the live action Godzilla movie from Japan, and 3 anime movies. So it's kind of crazy to think that we thought that we would never get any more than 29 movies, and now we've added another 6 to the list. And but before then, that was all we ever wanted. And during this time, the Godzilla community only had those 29 movies to focus on. And the time since then, we were lucky enough to have like video games. We had the comics. We had when did I think SH Monster Arts rather started in like 2011, 2012, I'd say.
Somewhere around that point.
Yeah. So there was always companies out there ready to capitalize on the niche Godzilla fan base. But in terms of the actual movies themselves, that's all we ever got. And with the failure of Gamera the Brave, all there ever really was for Godzilla fans to go after were, like, if you're someone like me scavenges around the internet looking for indie kaiju films like Gehara or Deep Sea Monster Raiga or Daikaiju Eiga G. Other than that, I think the only place to really get your kaiju fix would be Ultraman, because funny enough, Ultraman would see some sort of a resurgence after 2004. 2005, the next year, would bring about Ultraman Max. The next year would have Ultraman Mebius. For a while, we had some Ultraman movies, and leading up to today. But even then, there are some people who are Godzilla fans who never got into Ultraman. So I feel like the fandom really had to go out of their way to look for stuff in the dead period between 2004 and 2014. But until then, 29 films is certainly not a small amount by any means. So I feel like these 29 films were more than enough for Godzilla fans to reflect on, to share their opinions with online, and to establish, even like people like you, me, David, Dylan, Bill. We were all, eventually came online to talk about these particular movies, especially with the oncoming resurgence of that would be the Godzilla 2014 film. Mm-hmm. But like I mentioned before, with the Versus series, what are your opinions overall on this strange little experiment that was the Millennium series and its impact on the franchise?
Well, first of all, I figured out why we couldn't wrap our heads around the budget of Final Wars, because I had a Freudian slip and I said 19.5 million yen when it was $19.5 million.
Oh, okay.
That was a mistake on my part. It's funny how a single word can screw up an entire sentence.
Okay, so it was at least $5 million more than Shin Godzilla. That is surprising to hear, my friend.
Yeah, I got my currency screwed up there. So
actually, let me see what. Let's see, 19.5 million US dollars, 2004, and see how much that is worth today. Let's see, $2004 in 2017 at the very least, gives us, let's see, you said 19 million.
$19.5 million.
$1 million, okay. That's 1,000 million. Okay, calculate. And that's about roughly $25 million in 2017. So it's actually $10 million more than what Shin Godzilla would costed a couple of years back. And when adjusting for inflation. So yeah, okay, so it is significantly more expensive than Shin Godzilla.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyways, your thoughts on the...
on the Millennium series.
Yes, as a whole.
I'm kind of torn. I kind of go back and forth in terms of whether I like the Heisei series or the Millennium series better. On the one hand, there really are only each series only has like 3 films that I that I revisit regularly. Like for the Heisei series, I regularly rewatch Return of Godzilla, Biollante, and King Ghidorah. With the Millennium series, I do regularly watch 2000, GMK, and Godzilla X Mechagodzilla. And as for the other films, I don't. It just kind of like it just kind of like cycles for me. I do think the Millennium series is very interesting as far as for like its anthology approach. Like I mentioned with like Megaguirus, even though I don't care for that film that much these days, there are things about that film that I do like a lot. So for me, it's kind of like a regrettable and sometimes curious failure. So I guess it has that going for it. I'm not too fond of Tokyo SOS because I don't like the fact that the story is so minimal and that it's mostly just a big special effects show. But at the same time, it's got the special effects are polished and such, and there's some good music and such.
That's probably. I forgot to mention, like, Tokyo SOS would probably be like the most polished traditional tokusatsu effects we will probably see in a while.
Yeah, definitely. It's got the best Mothra since Tsuburai's time, definitely.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Yeah, those animatronic legs and those like wings, everything was just beautiful there. And I'm very glad to have been able to have gotten the chance to get a book that features a lot of the schematics and sketches and behind the scenes photos of that movie in particular. Anyway, sorry, continue.
Well, the anthology approach of the Millennium series, I do think, is kind of like interesting from like a historical perspective. However, the really funny thing that I will always find amusing about the Millennium series is that Toho, in terms of like their PR and such, kind of like advocated like that Godzilla 2000 was going to be like their big response to the '98 film, and that the Millennium series is kind of like credited by fans for like cleaning up the mess of the '98 film. When in actuality, Toho made a lot more money from '98 than from any single one of the Millennium Godzilla films.
That
again,
is
'98 sold about 4 million tickets in Japan, and the highest grossing Millennium Japanese Godzilla film was GMK at 2.7 million. Just very interesting, and also, as you might know, originally there was going to be a U.S. produced sequel to Godzilla 2000.
Oh yeah, I forgot what the plot line was going to be, but I just remember it being weird.
It's very weird. Steve Reifel wrote an article / interview with Mike Schlesinger on it on Sci-Fi Japan, which you can read for more details. But Toho got, even though the film was never made, Toho got a $5 million fee from Sony for that film that was never made. So they got money for films that never even got shot from Sony. So for all the talk of Sony, like screwing over Godzilla, doing Godzilla incorrectly, Toho got a lot of cash from them in the early 2000s and late 90s than they did from their own freaking movies. Funny enough.
Right. Oh boy, and we're gonna see that trend a lot when our third and final installment on the history of Heisei Godzilla, where we cover the new age of Hollywood Godzilla and the bizarre choices Toho made in terms of getting other people to make the movies in their place. But we will talk about that, about the movies from 2014 to 2018 in our next installment. In the meantime, thank you very much, Patrick, for being here to talk about the last traditional era of the Godzilla franchise before heading off into the modern age of Godzilla. And where can people find you if they wish to follow your endeavors?
Well, these days I'm most active as a writer for Toho Kingdom and Sci-Fi Wire, which is the official news site for the Sci-Fi Channel. I write for both those sites quite regularly. I cover everything from like American sci-fi to Japanese sci-fi to a non tokusatsu Japanese films. And I publish stuff on both those websites quite regularly. So those would be the two most common places to follow my endeavors.
Excellent. And so until next time, everybody, I have been Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir.
And I have been Patrick Galvan, the unbiased, truth-telling, pretentious, intergalactic, whatever I am.
And remember, folks, it's not the end. It's a whole new beginning. Da 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 da. See you next time, folks. Until then, take care.